Children are utterly stupid. You plant them in front of anything that provides enough auditory and visual stimulation and they'll proclaim it as the greatest movie ever made. You don't believe me? Take 4-year-old LionDog, for example. If you asked him to name his favorite movies, he would answer with Spy Kids 3D Game Over and... well, that completely ruined my argument. Toy Story 2. Not just my favorite Toy Story movie, not just my favorite Pixar movie, but one of my favorite movies of all time. When I was a mere lion puppy, I shoved this movie down my family's throat like I was a Jehovah's Witness at their front door. Whenever family movie night rolled around, this was an easy suggestion from me. Because of that, it might be the movie I have watched the most throughout my life. I bet I could watch this film on mute and I could still hear the audio loud and clear. And this wasn't just an opinion that I held only in my formative years. I remember my family bought this film and the original Toy Story on Blu-ray in early 2010 since they both came with free Toy Story 3 tickets, and you better believe that I devoured the bonus features and audio commentary that only increased my love for the film by showing the genuine artistry and effort put into it. And because of that, the trivia fact that Toy Story 2 almost got deleted and a working mother on maternity leave having a copy on her home computer almost saved the film stands tall as my most reliable pickup line. I've never been on a date in my life. Okay, enough beating around the bush, it's time to properly discuss this film. It's not enough to dwell on old memories, I need to explain the reason that those memories stayed with me for all these years. You're watching the LionDog Show, and I'm reviewing Toy Story 2. As seems to be the case with my non-linear reviews, I should start with something that might not be as good as I remember, the animation. I don't know, I still think it holds up. Sure, that might be due to modern resolutions, but when compared to its predecessor, it looks tremendously better in almost every way. Yeah, we all know at this point that Pixar made a movie about toys because of early CGI's plastic quality, but even then it still doesn't look believable. The animation looks like a fake version of a material known for being fake. In Toy Story 2, the rendering and lighting give these characters and environments a sense of life that they lacked in the original film, and show just how rapidly animation evolved back then. I would go so far as to say that the animation developed further within the 4 years between Toy Story and Toy Story 2 than within the 9 years between Inside Out and Inside Out 2. There's a reason every animation studio is trying to move away from realism. There's just less of a return on investment. Of course, animation alone cannot save a movie, and that's where the story comes into play. Get it? 'Cause they're toys? Look, if you rolled your eyes, that's your fault for watching me for my comedy. Okay, in my humble opinion, while Toy Story 3 might have something to say about it, this is a Toy Story movie with the largest scale. While other films take place in one primary location with maybe one extra stop for the climax, this film spans an entire city, and the fact that Buzz's crew actively embark on the quest to rescue Woody instead of passively being dragged from place to place make it feel way more ambitious. Okay, I know this might cause people to repost the following statement with that SpongeBob roller coaster meme, but Toy Story 2 genuinely feels like an epic. While most animated franchises create excitement through crafting a unique world that allows for outrageous situations, the Toy Story series does this through recontextualizing ordinary life through the lens of a toy. Through their eyes, a trip to the toy store is a day-long journey, the air ducts of an apartment are a vast labyrinth, and an airport conveyor belt is a grand climax. So grand of a climax that Pixar ripped it up in their very next movie. It all screams creativity. It makes for a fun ride, especially with how the plot escalates. We start with Woody simply sneaking into a garage sale to save a penguin for him to drop off a ledge after he receives his next power star, only to end with Woody and Buzz racing on a horse to rescue Jessie from a plane preparing for takeoff and swinging off said plane as it flies off the runway. By the time the main conflict resolves, I feel like I witnessed a long journey, a feeling that I don't even get from Toy Story 3 and its climax. Now, to dive deeper into the plot, it might be easier to split this review into two parts focusing on each of the two major plot lines of the film, the Buzz plot and the Woody plot. Let's start with the Buzz half of the film. I don't think I'm stepping out of line by saying that Buzz is at his best in this movie. Despite how Woody and Buzz have been cemented as one of the most iconic duos in film history and essentially creating the template for the rest of Pixar's brand of buddy films, I feel like their friendship is not nearly as important to the franchise as people remember. Granted, that is for reasons that we'll discuss soon enough, but in this film, you truly see the extent of the friendship that started in the first film. Woody puts his faith in Buzz by placing him in charge of Andy's room while he's away, and when faced with the journey to rescue Woody, Buzz says to everyone,
"Woody once risked his life to save me. I couldn't call myself his friend if I weren't willing to do the same."
That line does far more justice to his and Woody's friendship than getting brainwashed, changing nationalities, or listening to pre-recorded lines for a majority of the movie ever could. Sure, he's still a bit naive with him mispronouncing s'mores, but he still maintains his awareness of being a toy and the growth because of that, something that the third and fourth movies failed to implement. Those films likely did that because of the comedic potential of a more oblivious Buzz, but fortunately, the second movie found a way to have their strawberry shortcake and play with it by simply introducing a second, more diluted Buzz who sidelines our Buzz for a bit. This could have easily felt like an annoying regression, but it works based on how hilarious it is and how it shows just how far Buzz has grown and the impact that Woody made on him. Of course, Buzz isn't the only character who gets more to do in this film. Unlike most sequels nowadays where it feels like half the side characters have less to do, almost every one of Andy's toys from the original film is given so much more screen time that it makes their roles in the original film almost seem superfluous in hindsight. Characters like Ham, Rex, Slinky, and Potato Head were just kind of there to show the shift in attention to Buzz. But in this movie, they're actually given roles to play, especially Rex. I think the filmmakers caught on to just how entertaining Rex was in the first movie, so they went out of their way to give him the most focus of the rescue party besides Buzz, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It's like having your typical animated movie plot about an underdog wanting to prove himself to the world within the plot of this movie. If I had to change one thing about it, I would have liked a little more closure to Rex finally defeating Zurg. The rest of the toys spend the entire film trashing on him, yet when he actually comes through and helping the team, it's complete and total crickets. The closest we get is Ham asking for his help playing the video game at the end. Oh, I see. He's only helpful when it benefits you, huh? At the very least, they do seem to be a bit more caring for one another this time around. While the first movie is absolutely hilarious, most of the cast is kind of unlikable for a majority of the runtime. In Toy Story 2, they still take a few shots at their peers, but it feels more in a friendly way, and they still look out for each other. That's not to say that this movie is not funny. While the original film definitely ranks above it due to having the more iconic lines, this film still delivers some strong comedic moments. The scene where the toys cross the street is great. Alan easily makes his way into the top 10 Pixar villains based purely on his comedy chops. Diluted Buzz just in general. The line,
$50 ain't bad.
This film is a riot from start to finish. Unpopular opinion, but the man filling up the plane's cargo hold who carelessly throws the box marked fragile and hearing the contents shatter is funnier than the entirety of Hoppers. I'm pretty sure half the internet was paid to think that lizard was funny. If there's one issue I have with the comedy, it's that the Star Wars references sprinkled throughout the film do not land well by today's standards. Maybe it was because of the renewed interest from the special edition re-releases in the prequel trilogy, but it seemed like the funniest joke in the late 90s to mid 2000s was to simply reference Star Wars and nothing else. So rewatching those moments in this movie almost date the film a bit. I mean, it's not like I can make my audience laugh today by going, "Guys! Watto!" Despite that pretty minor setback, the Buzz portions of the film continue to be Pixar at its most entertaining. And if that wasn't good enough for you, Pixar also decided to be its most heartfelt in the very same movie. While the aspects with Buzz and the others would have made for a fun top 10 Pixar contender, it is truly Woody's plot that makes this Pixar's best film. For starters, the plotline builds on the universe in such an obvious but still clever way. We already knew a bit of the toy line that gave us Buzz, but based only on the original film, Woody could have just been a generic cowboy doll. So this film decided to flesh out his past by having him belong to a popular children's show from the 50s, since that would be the time when westerns were still popular, and since it would have been long ago enough that Woody wouldn't know anything about it. And alongside this series, they gave him a whole crew. Without a doubt, Jesse is easily the most prominent member of Woody's roundup outside of Woody himself, and arguably the most prominent addition to the cast since the original toys. Even outside of sheer iconicity, Jessie is still a well-written character. She's energetic but never annoyingly adorable, and she's strong but never invulnerable. Sure, she could come off as a little obnoxious towards Woody in the middle of the film, but once you take into consideration her past, it makes sense why she would react that way to someone that she deems as naive. Speaking of her past, that montage. It's a contender for one of the best scenes in all of Pixar, relying solely on imagery and its song to deliver a heart-wrenching story. It's so impactful that it could stand alone as a short film without losing any emotion. It's seemingly impossible not to feel for her after watching that. Lastly, with Jessie, I appreciate how she and Woody share a purely platonic, albeit strong relationship. Sure, this was by necessity since Woody already has Bo Peep, but it's still nice to see characters risk their lives to rescue someone without there being any hint of romance romance between them. I know it's a Disney movie, but not every prominent male and female need to be a couple. And with that, I've officially alienated all of my Wild Hops fans.
Yeah, that's what everybody wants, a straight couple.
Moving over to Bullseye, I know that the trope of making every animated animal behave like a dog or cat has become overdone, but at the time, it was still a clever way to contextualize a cowboy's horse instead of just giving him a voice. Even if it does beg the question of why feral animals like Rex and Trixie can talk, but Bullseye can't. Maybe dinosaurs are just special like that. And then you have the Prospector, the first and possibly the best Disney twist villain. At the time, and even now, the twist really catches you off guard, especially since the film spends the majority of its runtime with Al as the main antagonist. He's a human, like Sid. Clearly, humans hold all the power in this world. How could a toy ever be a villain? Especially this kind elderly gentleman who's trapped in a box. What? Now, unlike many modern Disney films that rely on shock factor and very little else for their villains, Stinky Pete actually makes perfect sense as the villain within the context of the film. When Woody first expresses his desire to leave and explains how he ended up with Al, Pete essentially puts words into his mouth about how Andy doesn't care about him. After Woody's arm falls off, okay, I'll get to the fixing Woody scene, don't you worry, but I gotta say that the shot of the arm's threads coming undone is strangely satisfying in its own right. The Prospector has that sinister line,
"It's a dangerous world out there for a toy,"
to keep Woody with him. When Woody attempts to escape with his arm, he wakes Al up by turning on the TV and pinning it on Jesse. You know, I've seen this film countless times, and for some reason that detail still gets me. With the animosity between Woody and Jesse during that part of the film, it's easy to assume that Jesse was just lying to him about not turning the TV on. And when Woody gets fixed, he implores him to talk to Jesse before leaving because he knows that by talking to Jesse, Woody will understand the pain of a finite life with a child and wish to stay with the collection. When you're initially watching the film, a lot of this can be chalked up to grandfather-like wisdom, but on all rewatches, you begin to see just how manipulative he is. And despite his aggressive and undermining means, if you really think about it, his motives make perfect sense. The fact that he never experienced play because he just so happened to be the loser of the toy line is extremely sad when you think about it. He never chose to be Stinky Pete. Of course, to him, the only chance he would ever have to find any form of status is through being a collector's item, and the only way for him to reach the heights of that is through being a part of a whole set. In a way, his ultimate fate by the end of the film is kind of the perfect ending for him. Sure, he'll most likely lose every last bit of resale value, but he'll finally experience the love that he never had for decades. Also, only on more recent viewings do I start to pick up on some parallels between Stinky Pete and Woody in the original film. Through their distaste in space toys for how they eclipse them, they're resorting to dubious means to maintain control of a situation, and their tendency to boss others around to uphold their own ego. In a similar vein to how deluded Buzz showcases the growth in Buzz's life thanks to Woody, Stinky Pete showcases the growth in Woody's life thanks to Buzz. Man, Stinky Pete is such an excellent villain. Granted, there are a few plot holes in his role as the villain. For example, how did Jesse not see Pete turn on the television, or how did no one notice his box being open with how much he moves around in it? Aside from those, I can see why seemingly every Disney and Pixar film in the coming years would try to imitate him. If it weren't for Stinky Pete, we would never have Assistant Mayor Bellwether, and for that, he has my undying gratitude. The retrospective knowledge of the Prospector might seem like the only saving grace of an otherwise dull part of the film, but even back then, I loved the scenes with Woody trapped in the apartment. Despite being stuck in the same room, seeming like it would be a complete snooze fest when compared to the scene with Buzz and company getting into all sorts of hijinks, they still contain some of my favorite scenes to watch as a kid. And as an adult, I believe that has to do with a trait they all share: tangibility. I know that everyone on the internet loves to rave about the scene where Jerry fixes Woody, and while a lot of the raving comes from its music and Jerry's expertise, it also comes from his tools. His toolbox always enamored me with all its drawers, buttons, and that pressurized spray nozzle. In fact, I always wish that I could have that toolbox for myself just to see how it all worked. It's that same tangibility that makes the scene where Woody and the others play with the Woody's Roundup merchandise so fascinating, even though they don't explain why these toys never come alive. Keep in mind, I was born in 2002, growing up during the digital revolution, so seeing all these mechanical tools and trinkets floored me. This movie might have been my first experience with Anemoia. That's nostalgia for a time you never experienced if you didn't know that already. The film also evokes that feeling through the lighting. These scenes are often baked in a warm, inviting glow, a far cry from how the apartment initially appears when Woody first arrives, or even the cloudy day when Woody's arm initially rips. It all comes together to create a false comfort in the past that is shown to be a dead end, similar to how Woody's roundup ends on an unresolved cliffhanger. I guess now is a good time to dive into what truly rests at the center of this film. It's not about the unique journey, the comedy, the twists, or the Mr. Potato Head of it all. It's about what it symbolizes on a deeper level. Okay, the most blatant theme of this film are the issues of collecting culture. The entire conflict revolving around the toy's monetary value for a collector overtaking its practical and sentimental value for a genuine fan is no different from the issues surrounding most hobbies mutating from fun pastimes to escape the monotony of current year into an investment made of microplastics that ultimately ruins the hobby for everyone else. Look, we've all strolled past the trading card section at our local retailer. Those things are picked bone dry by people just looking to make a quick buck. Man, everyone loves talking about how Toy Story 5 is just so gosh darn relevant for discussing the impact technology has on children. Yet here, Toy Story 2 has been tackling an issue before it even was an issue. With that being said, I do feel like the portrayal of collecting is a little one-sided, especially for a film made by avid toy collectors. The film tries to paint this picture of staying at a museum being the worst thing toys could possibly do with their lives, but the movie doesn't do a great job showing how bad life as a museum exhibit would be. We never see the exact casing for it. Buzz and the film as a whole try to spin it as a small space, not unlike the glass case where Al keeps Woody, but for all we know, it could be a full-blown diorama to properly display the toys. It's most likely one of these since Al takes photos with elaborate sets to present to the museum. Sure, it could be a little claustrophobic, but it still sounds livable to me. Now you might be thinking to yourself, LionDog, it's not about the toys' comfort, it's about them not being loved by a child. If they're trapped in a museum, how will they live a fulfilling life? Well, I'd argue that being a part of a museum exhibit is a fulfilling and even noble life for a toy. As pretentious as it sounds, toys are art, and art should be preserved in some way, shape, or form. What better way to preserve art than to place it in a highly maintained museum? Also, what the prospector tells Woody about being adored by kids for generations isn't necessarily false. Sure, toys might get a little touch-starved, but kids will still love viewing them. There are most likely museum regulars who will love to see a specific toy. In fact, seeing those toys could even ignite an interest in toy manufacturing or the inspirations behind the toy, and could inspire children to pursue different careers. When viewed through that perspective, there is something oddly commendable about toys sacrificing any chance at meaningful relationships in order to uphold a legacy for other copies of them and serve as an inspiration for millions of others. Granted, that kind of comes into conflict with Woody's pre-established relationship with Andy, and that makes me wish that there could have been another character in this film who wants to go to the museum and stays on the plane at the end. Of course, that all would be due to this film having a far more important subject matter to address, one that is bound to fill anyone's heart with pure joy, death, and abandonment. One of the strongest aspects of Pixar is their ability to capture real emotions and meaning out of characters who couldn't be further from human, and this is very apparent in the Toy Story films. In the first Toy Story, we see jealousy in a search for a place through a toy simply being replaced by a cooler toy. Toy Story 2 takes this kind of storytelling to the next level by exploring the finite nature of life. These characters are toys, and what often happens to toys? They break. And Pixar takes this fact and turns it into something much deeper that humans face. Something that helps the film deliver this message is how realistic its main character deals with it. Woody doesn't suddenly flip on a dime after his arm tears. He still remains loyal to Andy and his toys even after his mortality becomes apparent. That's not to say that Woody shows no fear for his life whatsoever. His dream sequence is proof of that. But he doesn't let that affect him. at least at first. This is where Wheezy comes into play, a broken toy much like Woody who has given in to his fate. I mean, when was the last time that you heard a glass half full type say,
"What's the point in prolonging the inevitable?"
Despite this, Woody still risks his own life to save Wheezy from the yard sale. Also, remember the way that the rest of the toys react to Woody heading off to the yard sale? They all act like Woody is giving up on his life. They even make that far more blatant when they realize he's merely saving Woody and Rex says,
"It's not suicide, it's a rescue!"
Well, that could have just been a joke. It feels like they're clearly establishing a mortality metaphor in this film. Despite their assumptions, Woody still holds a firm belief in a toy staying by its owner's side regardless of its condition, which ultimately kicks the plot in motion. But like any firm belief, it can decay over time. When Woody initially arrives in Al's apartment, he slowly warms up to his own legacy and the friends he never knew he had. But he still remains adamant that he needs to return to Andy. Once he hears Jesse's life story, he then realizes that his condition doesn't matter. He could be in the best condition imaginable, but that would still never prevent Andy from growing up and moving on. His life with him and his own life will eventually end. Only now does it all seem so tempting. Why live a life with inevitable pain and loss when you could just live a life free of it forever? It's such a slow but believable shift in character. Of course, Woody doesn't stay with this plan. Buzz comes to set him straight, and the old clip of him singing "You've Got a Friend in Me" ultimately remind him of his love for Andy, something that hiding in a case could never replace. Now, Woody could have just stopped at returning to Andy and leaving the Roundup gang behind at the apartment, but he instead invites them to live with Andy. And this to me really drives home Woody's second biggest purpose outside of his commitment to Andy, and that's his dedication to the idea of toys finding fulfillment in children. We see this in the first film when he's encouraging Buzz, but this trait of his shows up on full display here. This belief makes him head to a yard sale to save a toy who saw himself as worthless, and it also pushes him to chase after an airplane to save another toy, even if it could result in him getting lost all over again. Those are the actions of someone who truly puts others' well-being before himself. Look, it's not my favorite Toy Story film, but I like how Toy Story 4 gives this side of Woody the attention it deserves. In the end, Woody makes it back, and because of him, Jesse, Bullseye, the little green aliens, and even Stinky Pete find new homes, and Wheezy eventually gets fixed. All of these would never have happened if not for Woody deciding to make a difference in people's lives and not spend his life hiding from pain. Our lives are short and often painful, but there will always be a reason for us to stick around for more. So, those are my thoughts on Toy Story 2. I've noticed this one seems to get forgotten within the Toy Story lineage, and I understand that. After all, it isn't the original, it doesn't have the tear-jerking ending, and it's not the controversial recent films. If you said that you preferred one of those other movies, I wouldn't argue with that. Much. But one thing that is undeniable is that this might be the most important film in the franchise. If not for this film, the original would likely stay as a nostalgic 90s flick that paved the way for other computer animated films. But Toy Story 2 turned this into an iconic franchise that, for better or for worse, proceeds to this day. It turned a simple story of friendship into a story of life, aging, and learning to deal with loss. Themes that would penetrate the rest of the franchise. Even the spin-off film Lightyear. You wouldn't have the ending of Toy Story 3 without this film setting up the truth that someday Andy will grow out of his toys. Not only is this an important film for both Toy Story and Pixar as a whole, it's an important film to me. It showed me that films, both live action and animated, could be more than a novel distraction. They could touch people, they could leave an impact on their lives, and they could make the world a better place, even if they're only about a group of toys. I'll admit that nostalgia plays a major role in it, but this will likely always be my favorite film of all time. Besides, without this film, we wouldn't have the classic YouTube video, YTP Woody loses his schmo, and a world without that video is a world I do not want to live in. You've been watching The LionDog Show, have a great day, and stick around for more.